So, I guess it's been about 9 years or so now, which seems pretty unbelievable to me. It's such a vivid memory that it almost seems fresh. But I think that may also be because I've repeated it so many times by now that I pretty much have an entire monologue memorized, recounting what I experienced. Seems pretty weird to say, but I was definitely lucky. Well, luckier than most, I should say. I knew some kids that saw a lot more of what happened that day than I did. In my opinion, I've pretty much moved on from the shooting and haven't really suffered from any long-term emotional scars, but a few of those guys ended up pretty fucked up from it all. I knew one girl who was super outgoing and smart before the shooting. She ended up dropping out of school our junior year because of a heroin problem, or, well, that's the rumor at least. A few years ago, my sister found out that she had killed herself while spending time at rehab, leaving her 2 small kids with only their elderly grandparents left to raise them. It's sad to imagine what she would have been had that not happened to us. And unfortunately, a seemingly large part of my former classmates have also struggled, some with severe emotional problems and depression, which resulted from that day. Anyway, I guess I'll just start this off like I always do. I remember it being one of the last few weeks of my freshman year. It was cloudy, as it often is during the springtime in Oregon. What I remember thinking, what was initially odd about that day, is that it seemed much too warm for the sun to be hidden behind such a thick layer of clouds. It was hot, sticky, humid, and overall extremely uncomfortable. The high temperature had forced almost all the students and teachers to the courtyard during passing time, 10 minutes between classes, in order to achieve some temporary relief from the stuffy, non-air-conditioned classrooms we were stuck in all morning. I have 2 sisters. One is a year younger and still in middle school at the time. My older sister was a sophomore, but happened to be home with the stomach flu that entire week. It was a Friday, and I remember everyone was really looking forward to our long Memorial Day weekend. My parents were supposed to take my sisters and I for a weekend at a nearby resort town, which is a popular thing to do among our community. I spent the time before school making plans with friends and chatting about the various 15-year-old shenanigans we would partake in. To say that our weekend plans had changed would be an understatement. I had PE first period that quarter, and we spent that time playing flag football out on the stadium turf behind the school. Since I had a free second, I volunteered to take the equipment back to the supply closet in the upstairs gym, while everyone else went to the locker rooms to get ready for the next class. We had 2 gyms and locker rooms on the west side of the school, and a large enclosed courtroom separating them from the other classrooms and administration office. I had finished putting the cones, pennies, and whatnot in their places and headed downstairs in the locker room, deciding to leave the supply closet open for the next gym period, which has turned out to be the single best decision I've made in my entire life. I had nearly gotten to the bathroom of the stairs when I heard a loud... I stopped dead in my tracks as my mind tried to process the noise I just heard. My confusion turned to horror as I heard the screams and saw everyone left on the west side of campus sprinting down the hallways and through the closest doors and slamming them shut. I turned running back upstairs as fast as I could and heard 5 more gunshots by the time I got to the supply closet and shut the door behind me. All I could do was sit in the corner and bury my head into my knees, sobbing. I heard 3 more scattered gunshots, and then nothing. Nothing for what felt like an eternity. I can't even begin to describe how slow time was passing. I had absolutely no sense of time because my cell phone was still downstairs in the girls' locker room, and there was no way in hell I was leaving the safe blackness of the supply closet. The worst part about hiding in the supply closet was not being able to talk to my mom and let her know I was okay. I just sat there, praying and thanking any god who would listen to me that my sister was safe at home. I would have driven myself insane with worry if I was stuck alone in the closet and not know whether or not my sister was okay. I sat and waited for what was either going to be my safety or my death. It seemed like hours before I heard the footsteps. There is no way to describe the feeling of being alone in total darkness, overwhelmed with fear. All of a sudden, I didn't feel like I was completely alone. I heard 2 sets of footsteps running up the stairs and into the gym, and then nothing. Nothing for a moment. Until I was nearly startled to death as I heard one final pop radiate through the gym rafters. My ears rang as I attempted to accept my impending death in the fatal position on the floor as the footsteps headed slowly toward the closet door. I watched the strip of light under the door as a shadow of 2 feet blocked the light and was overcome with terror. I heard the doorknob shake aggressively and began to sob, thinking of losing the chance to see my family again, and that my fate was stuck in the hands of an angry psychopath on a shooting spree looking for the opportunity to execute me as I crouched helplessly in a dark and lonely closet. Before I knew it, the doorknob had been broken off, and the person on the other side of it became a dark silhouette in the blinding fluorescent light of the gymnasium. The next few moments are the most vague in my memory, as a member of the SWAT team pulled me to my feet and ran with me by his side. It was so fast, my feet barely felt the ground. He kept my head down, but that didn't hide everything. I saw so much blood under my feet on the pathways as the officer rushed me through my school courtyard and murder scene. I didn't know him, but I had heard of him from my sister. He was a junior at the time, and a very depressed and bitter boy. I guess he had few friends, if any, and always seemed to have a temper. She witnessed him throw desks and have huge tantrums in class when he didn't understand the material, and even once thrown a punch at a campus security guard who was trying to calm him down one time. From what I've been told, this is more or less what went down. As I was finishing up in the supply closet, there was an altercation in the courtyard involving the gunman. He had words with another student and pulled out his gun, shooting the other kid 3 times before opening fire on the crowd as chaos ensued, following the first round. After fatally shooting both a student and a language arts teacher, he ran into the west wing of the school and hid underneath the bleachers in the downstairs gym for a while. After about an hour, his cover was blown, and he ran upstairs to the gym, where I was followed by an officer, and then shot himself in the head, which I didn't see. Thank God. It was a pretty terrifying experience, and I suffered from a lot of anxiety for a while afterwards. But I've lived a pretty successful life since then. One thing I've taken away is that no matter where I am, I always make a point to eye the nearest escape and plan of action, just in case.
First off, I want to say that this story is in no way meant to degrade Catholicism. I come from a very conservative town in the South, and the school I went to, past tense, thankfully, was verging on Westboro Baptist Church crazy. Was it unfortunate? Definitely. But does it reflect on the rest of this particular church as a whole? Not necessarily. This isn't that creepy or scary, but I need to get this story out. And as an avid reader of this subreddit, I thought this the most appropriate place to do so. For some backstory. I am now a 17-year-old female, and the actual mortification that occurred every day and every year during Lent started when I was in 4th grade and 9 years old, and ended when I was in 8th, 14 years old. I'd been going to the school, as I will refer to it in this account, since I was in kindergarten, and I've been mentally and emotionally scarred by my experience there. I could probably write a whole novel about how much I hate that place, but that's not why you're here, is it? My stay at the school involved a long process of being brainwashed into thinking that I was worthless and that no one would ever love me but God. In 4th grade, girls and boys were separated into 2 separate buildings and made it clear that we were not to interact with boys until we graduated, and then we could only marry boys for the purposes of procreation and fulfilling our womanly duties. Yeah, it's completely fucked up. The point is that once I went into 4th grade and separated from the boys, they started the mortification. I use quotes because the term mortification, at least the way it was used at the school, really just means torture. So here's what happened. When Lent, for those who don't know, the 40 days before Easter, when Catholics are encouraged to give up something to symbolize the 40 days Jesus spent without food or water in the desert, rolled around, we were told to line up around the big field for recess, a change from the usual chaos of darting off to the swings. They then told us to take off our shoes and socks. Slightly scared, we all obeyed. Side note, coming from a weird, sci-fi loving, not too religious family, I was the only girl in my grade who thought any of the stuff at the school was weird. I was beyond freaked at this point. Slowly, the teachers went around and put sharp rocks in our shoes and socks. We were then told to put them on, and that failure to do so would result in a trip to the principal's office and major trouble. Being the shy and scared 4th grader I was, I didn't dare step out of line. We put our shoes on and then we were told to stand. Standing alone was excruciating. The rocks dug painfully into the bottoms of my feet and stabbed upwards, digging into my skin. I remember that I had already started crying. I had an extremely low pain tolerance and was also scared shitless, and I could feel blood pounding in my toes. I didn't think it could get any worse. But then they told us to run. Every day for about 30 days, save weekends, praise Jesus, we were forced to run, and I mean run, for 30 minutes straight. Of course, we all cried. Me especially, since I was vaguely aware it was torture. But the teachers would scream at us that we weren't good enough, we didn't deserve to be alive, and that we were trash in the eyes of God, and it's the least that we could do. And then, instead of going to lunch, we were made to abstain from food, and instead spent the lunch period looking at our bleeding feet and talking about how much we deserved it. Damn, I wish this was a joke. I fucking wish I was kidding. Apparently, I was a problem child for not actually wanting to be tortured daily without rest because I spent about 20 minutes every day in spiritual guidance, which was basically me getting yelled at and threatened by the consecrated at our school. Basically, they screamed at me until I somehow accepted the fact that what they were doing to me was okay, that I did indeed deserve it, and that it was a secret between Jesus and I, so my parents didn't need to know. I absolutely hated having my feet bare following any type of the mortification, so I always wore at least socks during the February and March months. I danced a lot, so when my parents saw how ragged the bottoms of my feet looked during the summer, if we went to a swimming pool or somewhere where I had to take my socks off, they asked me if it was from dance, and I always said yes. I don't know why. Looking back on it, I regret nothing more than not telling them what happened. I can't remember the specifics of the rest of the mortification periods. Honestly, my time at the school were the worst years of my life. It doesn't feel good to think about. The only thing I can remember is the last day I ever went through in 8th grade. We were running. I was bleeding again. And the pain, for some reason, was the worst it had ever been. Everyone else in the girls' school was seemingly impervious to it. It scares the shit out of me to think that. But I don't think I'd ever cried more than I did that day. I was exhausted, tortured, malnourished, done, and I collapsed. I don't know how long I was down. I just remember staying face down in the grass with dirt up my nose, completely numb, save the unbearable throbbing in my feet. Everyone else went on the lunch period to marvel over their bleeding feet, but I was made to stay behind. This part is just one big shitty blur. Basically, I was told that if I couldn't run, I would have to cut myself. They made me slice open my thighs with the sharpest rock. I can't remember. I don't want to think about it anymore, but it was awful. By my second semester, I was done with everything. The school, the people there, just existing was hard enough. Then one day my mom saw the cuts on my thighs. Thinking it was self-harm, which it kind of was, she thankfully took me to a therapist where I was diagnosed with severe clinical depression, severe anxiety, and trauma-induced psychosis. I missed basically the majority of my remaining 8th grade year, only going when I was forced to so that I could still graduate. My parents, the only people who possibly hate that school more than myself, immediately enrolled me at a fine arts intensive private school. My one and only friend from school, who hates it too, believe me, was leaving to said high school. She is still my best friend, and I thankfully have had an amazing experience at my new school. I still have a lovely little collection of mental problems, and my legs are still scarred up. It pains me to think that I suffered for all those years under the delusion that I deserved it, but even more so to think that there were other girls there who thought, and maybe still think, that what happened to them was right.